What happens when a town's judgment becomes your prison? When whispers cut deeper than any blade, and shame becomes the only name people know you by? Emma thought she knew. She thought the worst thing that could happen was being abandoned while carrying a child. She was wrong. If you've ever been judged without a chance to explain, this story is for you. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The worst thing was discovering that some wounds can heal, but only when someone is brave enough to stand in the fire with you. This is the story of a woman who lost everything, her reputation, her friends, her place in the world, only to discover that sometimes love doesn't arrive when you expect it. Sometimes it comes when you need it most. And sometimes the very person who broke you is the only one who can put you back together. The autumn rain drummed against the window of Emma's small apartment above the bakery, each drop echoing the rhythm of her restless heart. At 23, she had imagined her life would look different, perhaps married to David, the banker's son, who had promised her the world in stolen moments behind the old church. Instead, she sat alone, her hands resting on the growing curve of her belly, listening to the muffled conversations of the townspeople below. "Did you see her at the market yesterday?" Mrs. Henderson's voice carried through the thin walls, bold as brass, walking around like nothing's happened. The shame of it. Emma closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. 6 months. 6 months since David had disappeared without explanation, leaving only a hastily scrawled note about needing time to think and opportunities in the city. 6 months of watching her body change while her world crumbled around her. The bakery bell chimed, and Emma heard her landlady, Mrs. Foster, greeting a customer with her usual warmth, a warmth that had grown noticeably cooler toward Emma in recent weeks. "Morning, Sarah." "The usual." "Please." And Mrs. Foster. The voice belonged to Sarah Mitchell, the pastor's wife. Emma had known her since childhood, had sung in her church choir, had been invited to family dinners. "I wanted to speak with you about your tenant situation." Emma's stomach tightened. She pressed closer to the window, straining to hear. "Emma's a good girl," Mrs. Foster said, though her voice lacked conviction. "She's always paid her rent on time." "Of course, but you understand the position this puts you in. The bakery has such a fine reputation. People talk, you know. They're saying things about the kind of establishment you're running." The silence stretched long enough for Emma to imagine Mrs. Foster's face, the way her mouth would purse when she was considering something distasteful. "I'll speak with her," Mrs. Foster finally said. Emma sank back from the window, her hand moving protectively over her belly. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "We'll figure something out." But as the days passed, figuring something out became increasingly difficult. The seamstress shop where she worked let her go, citing restructuring. The grocery clerk avoided her eyes when she shopped, bagging her items with unnecessary roughness. Even Father Murphy, who had baptized her as an infant, offered only cold politeness when she attended Sunday service. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Emma had been walking to the pharmacy when she encountered a group of women from her former social circle, women who had once invited her to tea parties and book clubs. "Emma," Margaret Sinclair's voice dripped with false sweetness. "How are you managing?" "I'm well, thank you." Emma kept her chin up, though her cheeks burned under their scrutinizing stares. "We heard about David," said Helen Crawford, her eyes lingering pointedly on Emma's rounded figure. "Such a shame when young men can't face their responsibilities." "Of course," Margaret continued. "Not all of us can afford to be so careless with our reputations. Some of us have families to think about." The words hit like physical blows. Emma felt her composure cracking, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "If you'll excuse me, I have an appointment." As she walked away, she heard Helen stage whisper, "Filthy. That's what comes of throwing yourself at men above your station. No self-respect." That evening, Mrs. Foster knocked on Emma's door. The older woman's face was kind but resigned, like someone delivering news she wished she didn't have to share. "Emma, dear, we need to talk." They sat at Emma's small kitchen table, the same table where she'd shared countless cups of tea with Mrs. Foster in happier times. The older woman's fingers worried the edge of her apron. "I've been getting complaints," Mrs. Foster began softly, "about you living here. Some of my best customers are, well, they're threatening to take their business elsewhere." Emma nodded, unsurprised but still feeling the fresh sting of rejection. "I understand. I don't want to do this, Emma. You've been like a daughter to me since your parents passed. But I'm 72 years old, and this bakery is all I have. I can't afford to lose my livelihood. How long do I have?" 2 weeks. "I'm sorry, truly I am." After Mrs. Foster left, Emma sat in her darkening apartment, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her. She had $47 to her name, no job, and nowhere to go. The father of her child was living his new life in Boston, probably engaged to some proper banker's daughter by now. She placed both hands on her belly and made a promise in the gathering darkness. "I don't know how, but I'll protect you. We'll survive this." Moving day arrived gray and drizzling, matching Emma's mood perfectly. She had found a room in the boarding house on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. The landlord, Mr. Garrett, had looked her up and down with calculating eyes before naming a price that would consume most of her savings within a month. As Emma loaded her few possessions into the back of Tom Murphy's wagon, the blacksmith's son was one of the few people still willing to help her. She noticed a small crowd had gathered across the street. They weren't even pretending not to stare. "Don't mind them," Tom muttered, hefting her trunk. "Small minds make for big mouths." The boarding house sat on Maple Street, a row of tired buildings that had seen better decades. Emma's room was on the 3rd floor, barely larger than a closet, with a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the alley behind Murphy's Tavern. The walls were thin enough that she could hear every cough, argument, and drunken song from her neighbors. Her first night there, she lay awake listening to the sounds of a life she'd never imagined living. A baby cried somewhere below her. A man shouted at his wife in the room next door. Footsteps stumbled up and down the stairs at all hours. This was her world now, a place for people society had given up on. The next morning, Emma ventured out to look for work. The millinery shop turned her away before she'd finished speaking. The hotel manager took one look at her condition and shook his head. Even the laundry, known for hiring anyone willing to work, suddenly had no openings. By noon, she was sitting on a bench in the town square, fighting back tears of frustration and despair. Her baby would be born in less than 3 months, and she had no way to support either of them. "Excuse me, miss. Are you all right?" Emma looked up to see a woman about her own age, with kind brown eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. She wore a simple brown dress and a concerned expression. "I'm fine, thank you," Emma lied. The woman studied her for a moment, then sat down beside her without invitation. "I'm Anna Coleman. I work at the textile mill outside town. You're Emma Walsh, aren't you?" Emma tensed, expecting another lecture about morality and proper behavior. Instead, Anna surprised her. "I heard what happened to you. About David Harrison leaving town, I mean. And I heard about the way people have been treating you since." Anna's voice carried no judgment, only sympathy. "It's not right." "People talk," Emma said carefully. "They do. And most of what they say is cruel nonsense." Anna turned to face her fully. "Listen, I don't know if this interests you, but we're short-handed at the mill. The work's hard and the pay isn't much, but it's honest work. My supervisor is my cousin Jack. He's more interested in someone's willingness to work than in town gossip." Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in months. "Hope, you'd recommend me? If you want the job, I'll speak to Jack today. You could start Monday." That afternoon, Anna walked Emma to the mill, a sprawling brick building that hummed with the sound of machinery and human effort. Jack Coleman was a bear of a man with graying hair and shrewd eyes that seemed to take Emma's measure in a single glance. "Anna says you need work," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir. I'm a hard worker, and I learn quickly." "Can you handle standing for long hours? The work's physical." Emma lifted her chin. "I can handle whatever needs doing." Jack studied her for another long moment, then nodded. 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. 15 cents a day. You'll work the sorting line with Anna until the baby comes. After that, he shrugged. We'll see. It wasn't much, but it was salvation. Emma felt tears of relief prick her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Coleman. You won't regret this. See that I don't. As they walked back toward town, Anna linked her arm through Emma's with easy familiarity. There's something else. My boarding house has better rooms than Garrett's place, and Mrs. Kowalski, who runs it, doesn't care about anything except getting her rent on time. The room next to mine just opened up. It's bigger than what you've got now, and cheaper too. Emma stopped walking. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Anna was quiet for a moment, looking out at the fields that stretched beyond the mill. When she spoke, her voice was soft with old pain. 3 years ago, I was in trouble too. Different kind of trouble, but trouble all the same. A woman named Marichin took a chance on me when nobody else would. She's gone now. Fever took her last winter, but before she died, she made me promise something. What? That I'd pass on the kindness. That when I saw someone who needed help, I'd remember what it felt like to be drowning and throw them a rope. Anna smiled. Consider this your rope, Emma Walsh. That evening, Emma moved her belongings to Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house. Her new room had a proper bed, a small desk by the window, and walls thick enough to muffle the worst of her neighbors' activities. For the first time in months, she felt like she might actually survive what was coming. As she arranged her few possessions, she felt the baby kick strongly, as if responding to her improved mood. Things are looking up, little one, she whispered. We're going to be okay. But even as she spoke the words, a part of her wondered if she was trying to convince the baby or herself. The mill work would sustain them for now, but what would happen when the child was born? How would she work while caring for an infant? And what kind of life could she offer a child in a world that had already branded them both as shameful? These questions followed her into sleep, where her dreams were filled with David's face and the phantom weight of a wedding ring she'd never wear. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the town in snow that muffled sounds and made the world seem smaller, more intimate. Emma's belly had grown round and heavy, and she moved through her days at the mill with the deliberate care of someone carrying precious cargo. The work was exactly as hard as Jack Coleman had promised. 10 hours a day, she stood at the sorting line, her hands moving automatically through cotton fibers, while her mind wandered to the rapidly approaching reality of motherhood. Her lower back ached constantly, and her ankles swelled so badly that she had to unlace her boots completely when she got home each evening. But Anna had been right about Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house. The Polish widow who ran it was gruff but fair, and she had a practical streak that Emma found reassuring. When Emma had worried aloud about what would happen when the baby came, Mrs. Kowalski had simply shrugged. Babies come when they come. We figure it out after. Then, with unexpected gentleness, I raised 4 children. I remember some things about keeping little ones alive. It was more support than Emma had received from her own community, and she felt a fierce gratitude toward these women who had become her unlikely family. The mill workers were a mixed group, immigrants, single women, men who'd lost their farms to bad weather or worse luck. They had their own code of ethics, one that valued honest work over social standing. Emma found herself accepted in ways she'd never been in the parlors and tea rooms of proper society. "You're different than I expected," said Bridget O'Sullivan one day during their lunch break. The Irish woman had worked the mill for 7 years and had a reputation for speaking her mind. "How so?" "The way people talk about you in town. I thought you'd be, I don't know, harder maybe, more brazen." Bridget bit into her bread thoughtfully. "But you're just a girl who got herself in trouble with the wrong man." "Is that so different?" "Different than what they're saying about you, yes. They make you sound like some kind of, well, like you were chasing after every man in town. But anyone with eyes can see you're just heartbroken." Emma felt her throat tighten. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged that her situation might involve genuine emotion rather than moral failing. As her pregnancy progressed, even the mill work became challenging. By her 8th month, she was exhausted by mid-morning and struggling to keep up with the pace of the line. Jack Coleman, observing her difficulties, called her into his office on a February afternoon when snow was falling heavily outside. Sit down, Emma. His voice was kinder than usual. You can't keep this up much longer. I can work. I need to work. I know you do. But you're about to fall over, and that won't help anyone. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same shrewd expression he'd worn the day he hired her. Anna's been talking to me. She has an idea. Emma waited, trying to read his expression. There's a cottage behind the mill, used to house the supervisor before we built the main office. It's been empty for 2 years, but it's sound. Small, but it has a proper stove and a well. Anna thinks you might like to rent it. Emma's heart jumped. A cottage meant privacy, space for the baby, a place where she wouldn't have to worry about disturbing neighbors with a crying infant. How much would the rent be? Anna suggested we work out a trade. You keep the cottage clean, tend the small garden behind it, maybe help with mending and such for the mill. In exchange, you get the cottage and a small wage for the domestic work. When the baby comes, you can work from home until you're ready to come back to the line. Emma stared at him, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity. Why would you do this? Jack was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the snow-covered mill yard. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old memory. I had a sister once, Sarah. She got herself in trouble when she was about your age. This was back in Pennsylvania, before I came here. My father threw her out of the house, said she disgraced the family name. He paused, his jaw tightening. She died in a charity hospital, giving birth to a baby that didn't survive either. Died alone because her family was too proud to help her. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. I've regretted that for 30 years, Jack continued. Regretted not standing up to my father, not helping her when she needed it. I can't change what happened to Sarah, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to you. The cottage was perfect in its simplicity. One large room with a sleeping alcove, a small kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, and windows that looked out onto the mill pond and the woods beyond. Emma moved in during the last week of February, with Anna and Mrs. Kowalski helping her arrange a few possessions and stock the kitchen with basic supplies. For the first time since her pregnancy had begun to show, Emma felt something approaching peace. She was still an unmarried mother in a judgmental world, still facing an uncertain future, but she had shelter, work, and the support of people who saw her as more than her mistakes. If you believe Emma deserves a happy ending, hit the like button and share this story with someone who still believes in second chances. It helps us keep telling stories like this one. On a March evening when the ice was beginning to break up on the mill pond, Emma sat by her window, sewing baby clothes by lamplight. The child moved restlessly inside her, as if sensing the approaching moment of birth. She found herself talking to the baby more frequently now, sharing her thoughts and fears, as if her child were already a companion rather than just a hope. I can't promise you an easy life, she murmured, her needle moving steadily through the soft cotton fabric. I can't give you a father's name or society's approval, but I can promise you'll be loved and you'll know you're wanted. As if in response, the baby kicked firmly against her ribs, making her smile despite her worries. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was no longer facing them entirely alone. She had found her tribe among the mill workers and boarding house residents, people who understood that survival sometimes mattered more than reputation. But in the quiet moments before sleep, her thoughts still turned to David, to the life they might have had together, to the man who had promised her everything and left her with nothing but the growing weight of his child. She tried not to hate him. Hatred was a luxury she couldn't afford, but forgiveness felt equally impossible. All she could do was focus on the future, on the small person who would soon depend entirely on her strength and determination. Everything else, love, forgiveness, the possibility of happiness, would have to wait. Spring arrived with Emma's labor pains, and by the time the apple trees were blooming, she was holding her daughter in her arms. Rose, named for the hope that beauty could grow from thorny circumstances, was born on a warm May morning with Anna holding one hand and Mrs. Kowalski managing the practical aspects of birth with efficient competence. The baby was perfect, with dark hair like her father's and Emma's blue eyes. As Emma counted tiny fingers and toes, she felt a fierce protective love that surprised her with its intensity. This child would never doubt her mother's devotion, never question whether she was wanted. The mill community embraced Rose, as they had embraced Emma. Jack Coleman installed a small cradle in the corner of the cottage workspace, where Emma did mending. Anna brought hand-knitted blankets and carved wooden toys. Even Bridget O'Sullivan, who claimed to have no patience for children, was seen making faces at Rose through the cottage window when she thought no one was looking. For 3 months, Emma's world contracted to the essential rhythms of new motherhood: feeding, sleeping, working when the baby napped, and marveling at the rapid changes in her daughter's development. Rose was an easy baby, content to sleep in her cradle while Emma worked, gurgling happily during their walks around the mill pond. It was during one of these walks, on an August afternoon, when the air shimmered with heat, that Emma saw a familiar figure standing at the main gate of the mill. Her steps faltered, and she pressed Rose closer to her chest, her heart beginning to race. David Harrison stood exactly as she remembered him, tall, broad-shouldered, his brown hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He wore a good suit, better than anything he'd owned when he lived in town, and there was a new confidence in his posture. But his eyes, when they found hers across the mill yard, held the same intensity that had first drawn her to him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Emma felt frozen between impulses to run toward him and to run away. Rose stirred in her arms, making a soft sound that seemed to break the spell. David began walking toward them, his pace measured and deliberate. Emma noticed that his hands were shaking slightly, and the observation gave her courage. Whatever he'd come to do, he was as nervous as she was. Emma. His voice was rougher than she remembered, as if he'd been shouting or hadn't used it much recently. David. She was proud that her own voice remained steady. What are you doing here? He stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving from her face to the baby in her arms. Emma saw the exact moment when the reality of Rose's existence hit him, the slight widening of his eyes, the sharp intake of breath. Is she? Yes. Emma lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. This is Rose. Your daughter. David stared at the baby for a long moment, and Emma saw a dozen emotions flicker across his face: surprise, wonder, fear, and something that might have been regret. She's beautiful, he said softly. She is. Emma's voice carried a note of fierce pride. No thanks to you. David flinched as if she'd slapped him. Emma, I know I have no right to be here. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need to explain. Explain. Emma's careful composure cracked. Explain how you left me alone and pregnant while you ran off to play banker in Boston? Explain how you let everyone in this town brand me as filthy while you were making your fortune? What exactly do you think needs explaining, David? He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar. Everything. All of it. I was a coward, Emma. I was terrified and selfish, and I handled everything wrong. But I never stopped thinking about you. Never stopped regretting. Don't. Emma's voice was sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare stand there and tell me about your regrets. Do you know what I've been through? Do you have any idea what it's been like? Rose began to fuss, sensing her mother's distress. Emma automatically began to rock her, the motion soothing them both. David watched this maternal instinct with something like awe. You're a good mother. I can see that. I always knew you would be. You knew nothing. But some of the anger had gone out of Emma's voice, replaced by exhaustion. What do you want, David? Why are you here now? I want to make things right. I know I can't undo what I did. Can't take back the pain I caused you. But I can try to fix what I broke. Emma studied his face, looking for the man she'd once loved beneath the stranger he'd become. How? David reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Emma's breath caught in her throat. I want to marry you, Emma. I want to give Rose my name and give you the life I should have offered you a year ago. Emma stared at the box, her mind reeling. A year ago, this moment would have been the answer to all her prayers. Now, it felt more like a complication she hadn't expected. That's very noble of you, she said carefully. But I don't need your pity, David. Rose and I are managing just fine. It's not pity. David stepped closer, his voice urgent. Emma, I love you. I've always loved you. I was just too afraid to act like it when it mattered. Love. Emma's laugh was bitter. You have a strange way of showing love, David Harrison. I know. I know I've forfeited any right to your trust or your affection, but I'm asking for a chance to earn them back. Not for my sake, for Rose's. She deserves a father, and she deserves to grow up without the stigma of illegitimacy. Emma looked down at her daughter, who had settled into sleep against her chest. Rose's face was peaceful, innocent of the complications that surrounded her birth. Where have you been? Emma asked quietly. What were you doing while I was losing my job, my home, my reputation? David's jaw tightened. Working. Building a future. I got a position with Crawford Banking in Boston. They offered me a partnership track if I could prove myself. I thought if I could establish myself, make enough money, I could come back and we could start fresh. Without telling me, without writing, without any word at all. I was afraid if I stayed in contact, I'd lose my nerve. I'd come running back before I'd built anything substantial to offer you. He shook his head. I realized now how stupid that was. How cruel. Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching the late afternoon light play across the mill pond. When she spoke, her voice was distant. Do you know what people called me after you left? Do you know what it was like to walk down Main Street and have people cross to the other side to avoid me? David's face darkened. Who treated you that way? Everyone, David. Everyone except the people who work here at the mill and the women at my boarding house. Everyone else in this town decided I was shameful, and they made sure I knew it. That's going to change, David said, his voice hard with determination. I'll make sure of it. Emma looked at him sharply. How? By marrying you. By claiming Rose publicly as my daughter. By making it clear to everyone in this town that you're my wife, and any disrespect shown to you will answer to me. Despite everything, Emma felt a flutter of the old attraction. David had always been protective of the people he cared about, and there was something compelling about his determination to defend her honor now, even though he'd been the one to compromise it in the first place. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt with grand gestures and pretty words. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. I'm staying at the hotel in town. Take all the time you need. David hesitated, then added softly. Would it be all right if I saw her again? Rose, I mean. I'd like to get to know my daughter. Emma studied his face, looking for signs of the man who had abandoned her. Instead, she saw genuine longing and what appeared to be sincere remorse. You can visit, she said carefully. But David, understand this. Rose is my daughter first. If you're planning to disappear again when things get difficult, it's better if you leave now. I won't let her get attached to a father who isn't going to stay. I'm not going anywhere, Emma. Not ever again. As she watched him walk back toward town, Emma felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to accept his proposal, and finally claim the respectability she'd been denied. But another part of her remembered the long, lonely nights when she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering if she'd done something to drive him away. Could she trust him with her heart again? More importantly, could she trust him with Rose's future? That evening, as she fed her daughter by lamplight, Emma found herself talking through her dilemma aloud. What do you think, little one? Should we give your father another chance? Rose regarded her with solemn blue eyes, as if considering the question seriously. Then she smiled, her first real smile, and Emma felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening after being locked for too long. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about choosing to believe in the possibility of a different future. The next morning, David returned with a bouquet of wildflowers and a wooden rattle he'd carved himself. Emma watched him interact with Rose, saw the wonder and tenderness in his face as he held his daughter for the first time. Whatever his faults, his love for their child appeared genuine. I've been thinking about what you said, Emma told him as they sat by the mill pond, sharing the task of entertaining Rose, about making things right. And if we do this, if we get married, it can't be just for Rose's sake or to salvage my reputation. I won't live in a marriage based on obligation and guilt. David looked at her intently. What would you need from me? Honesty. Partnership. The understanding that I'm not the same woman you left behind. I've learned to be strong, David. I've learned I can survive on my own. I won't give that up to become some decoration in your life. I wouldn't want you to. The woman I fell in love with was independent and spirited. I fell in love with your strength, not despite it. Emma searched his face, looking for the truth behind his words. What she saw there gave her courage to take the leap she'd been afraid to make. Ask me again, she said quietly. David's eyes lit up with hope and joy. He shifted Rose to one arm and took Emma's hand with his free one. Emma Walsh, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you and our daughter? Emma looked at Rose, sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to choose love over fear. Yes, she said. But David, anything. If you ever run away again, I'll hunt you down myself. David laughed, the sound rich with relief and happiness. I'm counting on it. 3 weeks later, Emma walked down the aisle of the same church where she'd once been welcomed as a child. This time, she carried Rose in her arms and wore a simple white dress that Anna had sewn for her. The congregation was smaller than it might have been. Some of the town's most prominent families had chosen to stay away, but it was filled with the people who mattered. Jack Coleman and the mill workers, Mrs. Kowalski and the boarding house residents, and even Mrs. Foster, who had surprised everyone by arriving with tears in her eyes and an apology on her lips. As David slipped his grandmother's ring onto Emma's finger, she felt the weight of the town's judgment finally lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer Emma Walsh, the disgraced woman who'd been branded filthy for her mistakes. She was Emma Harrison, wife and mother, surrounded by a community that had learned to value character over reputation. When they kissed to seal their vows, Rose gurgled contentedly between them, as if blessing the union that made them a family at last. Outside the church, as they posed for photographs, Emma caught sight of Margaret Sinclair and Helen Crawford watching from across the street. The women who had once called her filthy now looked uncertain, perhaps realizing that their harsh judgment had been premature. Emma felt no triumph at their discomfort, only a quiet satisfaction. She had learned that the opinions of others mattered far less than the love of the people who truly knew her. And as she looked at her husband holding their daughter, she realized that sometimes the best endings come from the most difficult beginnings. The town would always remember her story, but now they would remember all of it. Not just the scandal, but the strength, the love, and the second chance that proved that redemption was possible for anyone brave enough to claim it. As they walked toward their new life together, Rose sleeping peacefully in her father's arms and Emma's hand secure in David's, the whispers that had once condemned her became something else entirely. The quiet murmur of a community witnessing the power of forgiveness and the triumph of love over judgment. In the end, Emma had learned that being branded didn't define her. How she chose to rise above it did. What would you have done in Emma's place? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might inspire someone else. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Here on the channel, we tell stories like this, real, emotional, transformative. If you want more, hit the bell and come with us.